I stepped onto the USS Washington's deck, my boots hitting the metal with a hollow thud. The gray October morning wrapped around the naval vessel like a shroud, the air heavy with salt and diesel. My engineering toolkit weighed down my right hand, filled with specialized equipment I'd spent years mastering. Commander Phoenix Hayes stood waiting for me at the top of the gangway, his posture military straight. When I reached him, he extended his hand. "Mr. Jones, glad you could join us on such short notice." His handshake was firm, businesslike. His eyes gave away nothing. "Thank you for the opportunity, sir," I said, searching his face for any hint about why I'd been called in. "I was told this is a retrieval operation?" Hayes nodded once. "That's correct. All relevant information will be provided at the appropriate time." His tone made it clear that time wasn't now. I waited for more, but Hayes had already turned to a woman in uniform standing nearby. "Lieutenant Wells will show you to the engineering bay." Lieutenant Linda Wells stepped forward with a crisp nod. "This way, Mr. Jones." She didn't offer to help with my toolkit, just turned and started walking at a brisk pace. As we moved through the ship's corridors, I noticed crew members stepping aside, their eyes finding the floor or bulkheads when we passed. Two technicians near a junction stopped talking mid-sentence as we approached, resuming their conversation in whispers once we were a few steps beyond. "Is there something I should know about this mission, Lieutenant?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Wells didn't break stride or turn back to look at me. "Everything you need to know is in here." She pulled a sealed manila envelope from inside her jacket and handed it to me. "Commander Hayes wants you to read this after we've reached international waters, not before." I took the envelope, noting its weight and the red classified stamp across the front. "That's a lot of secrecy for a standard retrieval." "These aren't standard orders, Mr. Jones." She stopped outside a heavy door marked Engineering Bay 2 and finally turned to face me. "I suggest you focus on your preparations until it's time to read those." The engineering bay was spacious and well-equipped, with state-of-the-art retrieval systems I'd only read about in technical journals. A stocky man in Navy coveralls was checking pressure gauges on what looked like submersible launch equipment. "Cody Rodriguez," Wells said, gesturing to the man. "He'll be working with you on the retrieval operation. Rodriguez, this is Oscar Jones, the civilian specialist." Rodriguez looked up from his work, his face expressionless. He gave me a single nod of acknowledgement before returning to the gauges. "I'll leave you to get acquainted," Wells said, already heading for the door. After she left, I set my toolkit down and approached Rodriguez. "Good to meet you. I've worked on several deep-water retrievals before, but nothing with equipment this advanced." Rodriguez grunted, making a note on his clipboard. "Hope you're a fast learner." "I usually am. What exactly are we retrieving?" He finally looked at me, his dark eyes unreadable. "You'll find out when Hayes says you can find out." The door opened again, and a woman in a lab coat entered, followed by a younger man in uniform. Her badge identified her as Dr. Martinez. "Mr. Jones," she said, extending her hand. "I'm the lead scientist for this operation. This is Sonar Officer Tommy Kim." I shook her hand. "Doctor, maybe you can tell me what we're retrieving?" Martinez's expression remained neutral. "We're retrieving what we call the subject from approximately 3 miles below the surface. Your job is to ensure the retrieval equipment functions perfectly when we locate it." 3 miles? That's pushing the limits of most retrieval systems. What kind of subject are we talking about? Size, weight, composition? Martinez's eyes narrowed slightly. "The equipment specifications are in your briefing materials. Focus on ensuring the systems can handle extreme pressure and maintain precise control during ascent." "That's not really answering my question," I pressed. "If I'm going to set up proper retrieval parameters—" "You'll set up the parameters I give you," Martinez cut in, her tone cooling. "The subject's exact nature is classified beyond your clearance level." Tommy Kim shifted uncomfortably beside her. "The acoustic signatures we've been tracking are unlike anything I've ever seen. The frequency patterns almost seem to—" "Officer Kim," Martinez snapped, giving him a warning look. Kim fell silent immediately, his face flushing. I looked between them. Acoustic signatures? So this subject is alive? That's enough questions, Mr. Jones, Martinez said firmly. Review your equipment, prepare the retrieval systems. We'll reach the coordinates in approximately 48 hours. After they left, I stood alone with Rodriguez, who had watched the exchange without comment. Always this cheerful around here? I asked. Rodriguez shrugged. Get used to it. Nobody talks about anything important on this ship. I spent the next several hours checking the retrieval systems, my mind racing with questions. The sealed envelope sat on top of my toolkit, tempting me, but Hayes had been clear about when I could open it. That evening in my small cabin, I pulled out my satellite phone. Jenna would be worried if I didn't check in. We'd agreed I'd call once I was settled on the ship. I dialed our home number, but the call wouldn't connect. Frowning, I headed to the communications room. A man with a headset, his uniform identified him as Radioman Foster, looked up as I entered. Problem with the satellite connection, I explained, showing him my phone. Need to call my family. Foster shook his head. Sorry, sir. All external communications have been suspended for the duration of this mission. Commander's orders. I stared at him. I need to let my wife know I'm okay. I understand, sir, but I can't authorize any calls. Security protocol. This is a retrieval mission, not a covert op, I said, frustration building. What's the security risk in letting me call my wife? Foster's expression remained impassive. You'd have to take that up with Commander Hayes, sir. I left the communications room, a knot forming in my stomach. I'd taken this job because the money was too good to pass up. Jenna had been hesitant. 3 weeks at sea meant she'd be alone with our 8-year-old twin daughters, but the payment would cover 6 months of mortgage payments and help with the medical bills from when Emma had broken her arm last summer. Now, standing in the corridor of a ship full of people avoiding eye contact and speaking in whispers, with a sealed envelope I couldn't open and equipment designed for something nobody would describe, I wondered what I'd gotten myself into. Whatever we were retrieving from the ocean depths, it was clear this wasn't just another salvage operation. I returned to my cabin and sat on the edge of the narrow bunk, turning the sealed envelope over in my hands. Whatever was inside, I had a growing feeling that I wouldn't like it. And 3 miles below the surface was a long way down to go for something nobody wanted to talk about. I held the sealed envelope in my hands, turning it over and over. The weight of the paper seemed heavier than it should be, like it contained more than just orders. We'd reached international waters hours ago, but I'd put off opening it, busy with equipment checks and trying to get a feel for the crew. Now, alone in my cabin, I couldn't delay any longer. I broke the seal and pulled out several pages of technical documentation. My eyes scanned the contents, taking in specifications for deep water retrieval systems, pressure tolerances, and operational parameters. The information was detailed but oddly incomplete, like reading only half a manual, nothing about what we were actually retrieving. Then I saw it, a single line buried in the procedural text that made my stomach drop. Crew members must be prepared for immediate evacuation procedures. I read it again, and again. Emergency evacuation wasn't unusual for naval operations, but something about how it was phrased, not as a contingency but an expectation, felt wrong. The line seemed to stare back at me, a warning hidden in plain sight. I flipped through the remaining pages, looking for anything that might explain what we were heading toward. Nothing. Just technical requirements, depth ratings, and equipment specs. The absence of information spoke volumes. I folded the papers and tucked them back into the envelope. Whatever we were retrieving, the military didn't want anyone knowing more than absolutely necessary. Even me, the guy responsible for making sure we could bring it back. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and tension. I spent most of my time in Engineering Bay 2, working with Rodriguez to ensure every component of the retrieval system was functioning perfectly. The rest of the crew moved with purpose but said little, their faces tight with the same unspoken questions I had. On the 3rd day, Commander Hayes announced we'd reached our destination. I made my way to the control room where a cluster of monitors showed feeds from the ship's external cameras. Outside, the ocean stretched in every direction, empty and vast. "Jones," Rodriguez called from the launch bay entrance. "We're ready to deploy." I followed him to where his team was preparing the Nereid submersible for launch. The sleek vessel hung suspended over the water, its titanium hull gleaming under the bay lights. I'd spent hours calibrating its retrieval mechanisms, testing and retesting the hydraulic arms and collection chambers. "Everything check out?" Rodriguez asked as I ran my hand along the submersible's side. "Should work perfectly," I said, "as long as whatever we're collecting falls within the parameters I was given." Rodriguez gave me a look that said he shared my concerns but couldn't voice them. The launch team secured Lieutenant Anderson and his crew inside the Nereid. I watched from the control room as the massive bay doors opened, revealing a rectangle of dark ocean. The winch system lowered the submersible until it touched the water, then released. The Nereid bobbed for a moment before its ballast tanks filled and it began to sink. Dr. Martinez stood beside me, eyes fixed on the main monitor showing the submersible's descent. Tommy Kim monitored sonar readings at a nearby station. Commander Hayes entered and positioned himself at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching everything. Passing 1,000 feet, Anderson's voice came through the speakers, calm and professional. The descent continued in relative silence. 5,000 feet, 8,000, 10,000. The pressure outside the submersible would be crushing now, enough to flatten a human body in seconds. I watched the depth gauge tick upward and thought about the evacuation procedures mentioned in my orders. 12,000 feet, Anderson reported. All systems nominal. At 14,000 feet, Anderson's voice changed. "Control, we're picking up something on forward scan." The room tensed. Martinez leaned toward the monitor, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the console. "Can you identify?" Hayes asked. "Negative, sir. I've never seen anything like this." The camera feed from the Nereid adjusted, and then we saw it, a translucent, pulsating sphere suspended in the darkness. It was massive, at least 20 feet across, with a surface that seemed to ripple and shift like it was breathing. It wasn't mechanical. It looked alive. Martinez gasped. "My God," she whispered. "What is that thing?" I asked, but no one answered. "Anderson, approach with caution," Hayes ordered. "Maintain minimum safe distance until we determine what we're dealing with." "Copy that," Anderson replied, but I could hear the tension in his voice. The Nereid inched closer to the sphere. As it did, I noticed something strange, a low, rhythmic humming coming through the hydrophones. The sound wasn't loud, but it seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull, resonating in my chest. "Are you picking that up?" I asked Kim. He nodded, adjusting his headphones. "Started when we got within 100 yards of the object?" The humming grew stronger as the Nereid approached. It wasn't mechanical. It had a pattern that felt almost musical, rising and falling in waves. "Get samples if possible," Martinez instructed Anderson. "But do not make direct contact until we understand what we're looking at." I watched the monitor, unable to look away as the submersible maneuvered closer to the pulsating sphere. The humming intensified, and I felt a chill run down my back. Something about that sound felt wrong. Not just unfamiliar, but fundamentally wrong, like hearing a voice in an empty house. The sphere's surface rippled more violently as the Nereid approached. Patterns of light seemed to move beneath its translucent skin, shifting and swirling in response to the submersible's presence. "It's reacting to us," Anderson said, his voice tight. "Proceed with extreme caution," Hayes ordered. I stood frozen, watching the monitor as the Nereid edged closer to the sphere. The humming had become a constant presence now, vibrating through the deck plates beneath my feet. A sense of dread built inside me, growing stronger with each passing second. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just some scientific curiosity. It wasn't a geological formation or lost technology. It was something else entirely, something none of us understood. and we were poking at it with a metal stick. I wanted to say something, to suggest backing off until we knew more, but the words caught in my throat. I just kept watching the monitor, the sphere pulsating in the darkness, the Nereid drawing ever closer to something that felt increasingly dangerous with each passing moment. I stared in horror as the sphere suddenly burst open like a massive egg. The translucent surface that had been pulsing with unknown energy tore apart, releasing something into the water that made my blood turn cold. A colossal creature emerged from within, completely black and light-absorbing, its form seeming to drink in all illumination from the Nereid's lights. "What the hell is that?" someone behind me whispered. I couldn't answer, couldn't tear my eyes from the monitor. The thing resembled a giant squid with 8 massive tentacles unfurling in the water, but nothing like any cephalopod I'd ever seen in textbooks or nature documentaries. Most disturbing were its eyes, large, glowing electric blue orbs that fixed directly on the camera. Those eyes held an intelligence that sent a chill through me. They weren't the vacant eyes of some deep-sea creature. They were studying us, assessing us. "It's looking right at us," I said, my voice barely audible. Based on the scale markers on the Nereid's camera display, I estimated the creature was at least 200 feet long. The largest giant squid ever recorded was a fraction of that size. Lieutenant Anderson's panicked voice crackled through the speakers. "Command, we need extraction now. This thing is..." His words cut off as one tentacle shot toward the submersible with impossible speed. The camera view tilted wildly as the Nereid tried to maneuver away, but it was too late. Another tentacle appeared, then another, wrapping around the vessel. "Full reverse thrust," Anderson shouted to his crew. The submersible's engines whined in protest. We watched in stunned silence as the creature wrapped its tentacles around the Nereid. The metal hull began to buckle under pressure, making horrible groaning sounds that carried through the water to our hydrophones. "Get them out of there!" I turned to Commander Hayes, who stood rigid, his face pale. "Anderson, initiate emergency ballast release," Hayes ordered into the microphone. "Get to the surface now." "Can't. Systems failing, pressure building." Anderson's voice was tight with fear. The camera feed showed the tentacles constricting, the viewport beginning to crack. "Oh God, it's crushing." Anderson's final transmission was just a desperate scream that cut through the control room like a knife before communications died. The video feed flickered, showing one last image of those electric blue eyes before turning to static. "Nereid, come in," Hayes said, his voice steady but strained. "Nereid, respond." Nothing but static answered him. On the sonar display, we watched as the creature dragged the submersible downward, the blip that represented the Nereid moving deeper into the abyss until it disappeared from range. The control room erupted in frantic activity. Hayes grabbed the ship-wide comm. "All hands to emergency stations. Prepare for immediate departure." "Sir," Tommy Kim called out, his voice shaking as he pointed at the sonar display. "The creature, it's ascending. Rapidly." Hayes moved to the sonar screen. I followed, looking over his shoulder at the massive signature rising through the water column at an impossible speed. "Full power to engines," Hayes ordered. "Get us out of here now." I felt the ship lurch as the engines engaged. The deck vibrated beneath my feet as we tried to flee. I made my way to the bridge windows, looking out at the dark water. The sky had turned gray with approaching storm clouds, making the sea look like rolling black glass. "It's still gaining," Kim reported, his voice rising in pitch. "Estimated surface breach in 30 seconds. I felt the engines strain as they pushed the ship to its limits. The bow rose slightly as we picked up speed, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. 500 yards off the starboard side," Kim shouted. The water bulged upward, forming a dome that rose higher and higher. Then it exploded outward as the creature broke the surface. Even from this distance, I could see its massive form, tentacles thrashing in the air. The breach created waves that radiated outward, hitting our ship with tremendous force. The vessel lurched violently to port, throwing me against the wall. Alarms blared throughout the ship as the waves continued to rock us. I stumbled to my feet and made my way to the deck, needing to see what we were facing. Outside, rain had started to fall, mixing with the seawater that crashed over the bow. I gripped the deck railing to stay upright, my knuckles white. The creature was fully visible now, its black form a stark contrast against the churning gray sea. Those electric blue eyes seemed to find me even at this distance. "Jones!" Rodriguez appeared beside me, his face streaked with rain. "We need to get below," Hayes ordered. His words were cut short as the creature's tentacles lashed out, striking the starboard side of the ship with a sound like thunder. Metal screamed as it tore apart. The ship listed sharply, throwing both of us against the railing. Water rushed over the deck as the ship tilted further. I could hear the structural supports groaning under the strain. Another tentacle rose from the water, poised to strike again. Phoenix Hayes' voice boomed over the ship's speakers. "All hands abandon ship. This is not a drill. Proceed to lifeboats immediately." Around me, crew members rushed to the lifeboat stations. The ship shuddered as another tentacle struck, tearing open the hull somewhere below. I looked back at the creature, its massive form now less than 300 yards away, those blue eyes fixed on us as it prepared to destroy what remained of our vessel. I ran toward the port side, my boots sliding across the metal deck as the ship listed hard to starboard. The rain made everything slick, and I had to grab onto a railing to keep from falling. The whole vessel groaned beneath me, steel protesting as it bent in ways it was never meant to. Behind me, I heard Tommy Kim scream. I turned just in time to see one of those massive tentacles punch through the bridge windows like they were made of tissue paper. Glass exploded inward. Tommy's scream cut off abruptly. I couldn't go back for him. The ship was going down fast, and that thing was tearing it apart piece by piece. I needed to find a way off before we all ended up at the bottom of the ocean. The deck tilted more severely, forcing me to half-climb, half-slide my way to the nearest hatch. I yanked it open and descended the ladder into the ship's interior, fighting against the growing angle of the floor. The emergency lights flickered, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Water was already ankle-deep in some of the corridors. I pushed through, heading for the engine room. If anyone knew the fastest way off this dying ship, it would be the engineering crew. When I reached the engine room, the scene was chaos. Water poured through a massive breach in the hull, already filling the lower section. The main power systems were dead, but I spotted Cody Rodriguez at the emergency panel, frantically working to maintain what little power remained. "Rodriguez!" I shouted over the roar of rushing water and groaning metal. He looked up, his face pale in the emergency lighting. Sparks showered from a damaged electrical panel behind him, reflecting in the rising water, a deadly combination waiting to happen. "Jones." He waved me over. "Main power's gone. I'm trying to keep the emergency systems online, but we're taking on water too fast." As if to emphasize his point, the ship lurched again. More water surged through the breach, rising faster now. Rodriguez grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. "We need to get topside. There should still be lifeboats on the starboard bow." I nodded. "Lead the way." We abandoned the emergency systems and made for the exit. The water was already up to our knees, making each step a struggle. We climbed the nearest ladder, fighting against the ship's increasing tilt. 2 decks up, we heard a cry for help. I paused, peering down a flooded corridor. "There," I pointed. Dr. Martinez was pinned under a section of collapsed ceiling. Water was rising around her, already reaching her chest as she struggled to free herself. "We have to help her," I said, already moving in her direction. Rodriguez followed without hesitation. We waded through the water, which was getting deeper by the second. "My leg," Martinez gasped as we reached her. "I can't move it." The fallen debris had her trapped. A metal support beam lay across her left leg, and from the unnatural angle, I could tell it was badly broken. "We'll get you out," I promised, though I wasn't sure how. Rodriguez braced himself against the wall. "On 3, I'll lift. You pull her clear." I nodded, getting a good grip under Martinez's arms. 1, 2, 3. Rodriguez strained, muscles bulging as he lifted the beam just enough. I pulled Martinez free, trying to ignore her scream of pain as her broken leg moved. The ship groaned again, a deep, terrible sound of metal giving way. Through the hull, I felt more than heard a massive impact. "It's got the stern," Rodriguez said, his face grim. "We need to move now." I hoisted Martinez up, supporting her weight as best I could. "Can you put any pressure on that leg?" She shook her head, face white with pain. "No, it's broken badly." Rodriguez took her other side, and together we half-carried, half-dragged her toward the nearest stairwell. The ship's angle made climbing difficult, but we managed to reach the main deck. Outside, the storm had intensified. Rain lashed at us as we emerged into the open air. The deck was nearly vertical now, making it almost impossible to stand without holding on to something. At the starboard bow, I spotted Radio Man Foster and 3 other crew members struggling with one of the remaining life rafts. They'd managed to deploy it, and it bobbed in the churning water alongside the sinking ship. "There!" I shouted over the storm. "Our way out!" We made our way toward them, sliding more than walking across the tilted deck. Martinez cried out with each movement, but she kept going, gripping our shoulders with white-knuckled hands. As we neared the life raft, I felt a chill run down my back. I turned to look behind us, toward the stern of the ship. The creature was there, its massive form partially visible above the water. Those blue eyes, unnaturally intelligent, seemed to be watching us, tracking our movements. One of its tentacles was wrapped around the ship's stern, pulling it down into the depths. Foster saw us approaching and waved frantically. "Hurry! She's going down fast!" We reached the railing where the others waited with the life raft. The 3 crew members I didn't recognize helped take Martinez from us. "Careful with her leg," I warned as they lowered her into the raft. Rodriguez went next, then Foster and the others. I was last, looking back one final time at the USS Washington, a state-of-the-art vessel now being dragged to its doom. I jumped, landing hard in the raft as it rocked violently in the churning water. My shoulder hit one of the inflated sides, sending pain shooting down my arm. We pushed away from the sinking ship, using the paddles to put distance between us and the disaster. The rain continued to pour down, making it hard to see more than a few yards ahead. Behind us, the Washington's stern disappeared beneath the waves with a sound like a dying animal. The bow rose higher for a moment, pointing toward the stormy sky, before it too was pulled under. I watched in shock as the massive vessel, hundreds of feet of military-grade steel and technology, vanished completely. The ocean swallowed it whole, leaving nothing but churning water and floating debris where it had been moments before. The creature had pulled it down. That thing, whatever it was, had destroyed a naval vessel like it was nothing more than a toy in a bathtub. I watched from the life raft as the creature circled the sinking ship. Its massive tentacles reached through the wreckage like curious fingers, probing and exploring what remained of the Washington as it slipped beneath the waves. The rain had eased to a light drizzle, but the sea still rolled beneath us, making our small raft pitch and yaw with each swell. None of us spoke. What could we possibly say? We'd just watched something impossible destroy a military vessel in minutes. The creature's skin gleamed in the dim light, slick and black against the gray ocean. One of its tentacles lifted a chunk of metal from the water, a piece of the bridge, I thought, then let it drop with a distant splash. The intelligence behind those movements was what frightened me most. This wasn't random destruction. It was examination. Rodriguez sat across from me, his face pale and drawn in the fading light. His hands gripped the edges of the raft so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Foster huddled near the center with the other 2 crew members, a navigation officer named Reyes and an engineer called Patel. They stared at the water with hollow eyes. "It's going," Foster whispered, pointing with a shaking hand. The creature's enormous form began to sink, its tentacles withdrawing from the surface debris. The last thing to disappear was one of those glowing blue eyes, fixed on our raft until the moment it slipped beneath the waves. Then it was gone, leaving only scattered pieces of the Washington floating on the suddenly quiet sea. "Is it coming for us?" Patel asked, her voice barely audible. "I don't think so," I said, though I had no idea if that was true. It got what it wanted. Dr. Martinez lay beside me, her face ashen and drawn with pain. Her broken leg was stretched out awkwardly in the cramped space, and I'd used my belt to fashion a makeshift tourniquet above the worst of the damage. Blood had soaked through the pant leg, but the bleeding seemed to have slowed. "We need to check for supplies," Rodriguez said, breaking the silence that had fallen over us. "See what we've got to work with." We took inventory: 2 emergency flares, a small first aid kit with basic supplies, a hand-cranked radio, 4 liters of fresh water, and some energy bars. Not much for 6 people, but it would have to do. I turned my attention to Martinez while the others sorted through our meager provisions. Her eyes fluttered open when I touched her shoulder. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice thin and strained. "You'll live," I told her, though I wasn't a doctor and had no real way of knowing how serious her injuries were. "Try not to move too much." She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Jones," she whispered, pulling me closer. "You need to know. The mission, it was classified, above my clearance level." I leaned in, straining to hear her over the sound of water slapping against the raft. "They didn't tell us everything," she continued, her words coming in short, pained bursts. "That sphere, it wasn't the only one. Similar objects detected, worldwide." "What?" I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. "How many?" "Don't know. At least 3 others confirmed: Pacific, Indian Ocean, North Sea." Her eyes closed briefly, her face contorting with pain. "They're watching us. Have been for who knows how long." Before I could ask more questions, she slipped into unconsciousness, her grip on my wrist going slack. I checked her pulse, weak but steady. She needed medical attention soon. The night that followed was the longest of my life. We took turns keeping watch, though what we could do if the creature returned, I had no idea. The temperature dropped, and we huddled together for warmth, our clothes still damp. No one slept much. Every splash, every movement in the water sent a jolt of terror through me. Morning came with fog so thick we couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. The radio picked up nothing but static. We rationed the water and food, knowing we had no idea how long we'd be adrift. Martinez drifted in and out of consciousness. Her leg had swollen badly, and I worried about infection setting in. The second night was worse than the first. A storm blew in, not severe but enough to toss our small raft around like a toy. We bailed water constantly to keep from being swamped. By morning, exhaustion had set in, making even simple tasks difficult. The fog lifted on the 3rd day, revealing nothing but empty ocean in every direction. We fired one of our flares, watching the red streak arc into the sky and fade away with no response. Hours crawled by. The sun beat down on us, and we covered Martinez with our shirts to keep her from burning. Her condition was deteriorating, her skin hot with fever. It was late afternoon when Rodriguez spotted it, a distant speck on the horizon that gradually resolved into the silhouette of a Coast Guard cutter. We fired our second flare, and this time there was a response. A helicopter lifting off from the ship's deck and heading in our direction. The sound of the rotors was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. The helicopter hovered above us, the downdraft whipping the sea into a frenzy around our raft. A rescue swimmer dropped into the water and made his way to us. Martinez was lifted first, secured in a basket, and winched up to the helicopter. The rest of us followed one by one. Inside the helicopter, medical personnel immediately attended to Martinez. I sank into a seat, the reality of rescue washing over me in waves of relief. 18 hours in that raft had felt like 18 days. A woman in a Coast Guard uniform approached me, clipboard in hand. Something about her seemed off, too composed, too unsurprised by our appearance or story. "Oscar Jones?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. Linda Park, Coast Guard Rescue Coordinator. She didn't offer her hand. Once we land, you'll be debriefed. For now, I need you to sign this. She handed me a document labeled Non-Disclosure Agreement at the top. I scanned the text, my tired brain struggling to make sense of the legal jargon. Phrases jumped out at me. Matters of national security, classified information, criminal prosecution, minimum sentence of 20 years. What is this? I asked, looking up at her. Standard procedure for incidents involving military vessels, she replied smoothly, but her eyes told a different story. She knew exactly what had happened out there. And if I don't sign, that would be unwise, Mr. Jones. Her tone remained pleasant, but the threat was clear. Very unwise. I looked around the helicopter. Rodriguez was already signing his copy, as were the others. Martinez was unconscious on a stretcher, an IV in her arm. I took the pen Park offered and signed my name, wondering what I was getting myself into. Thank you, she said, taking the clipboard back. You'll receive medical attention when we land. After that, you'll be questioned about the incident. Stick to the facts. Nothing more, nothing less. The helicopter landed at a military facility I didn't recognize. We were separated immediately, each taken to different rooms. Doctors examined me, treating my shoulder injury and the various cuts and bruises I'd accumulated. They gave me dry clothes, food, and water. Then the questioning began. 2 men in suits interviewed me for hours, asking the same questions repeatedly in different ways. I told them everything: the sphere, the creature, the destruction of the Washington. They showed no reaction, taking notes without comment. When they finished, they had me sign another document, this one even longer than the first. 3 days later, they released me. A car drove me to the airport, where a ticket to San Diego waited. No one explained anything. No one mentioned the Washington, the creature, or what would happen next. I was simply expected to go home and forget. Jenna met me at the airport, throwing her arms around me the moment I appeared. Our daughters, Emma and Sophie, clung to my legs, their small faces bright with excitement. I hugged them all, breathing in the familiar scent of home and family, trying to push away the images that haunted me. They told me there was an accident, Jenna said as we drove home, that the research vessel you were on sank in a storm. They wouldn't tell me anything else? I nodded, the lie sticking in my throat. Yeah, a storm. She glanced at me, concern in her eyes. Are you okay? You look different. Just tired, I said. It's been a rough few days. That night, after the girls were in bed, Jenna sat beside me on the couch, her hand on mine. What really happened out there, Oscar? I wanted to tell her. The words pressed against my teeth, desperate to escape. But I thought of the non-disclosure agreement, the veiled threats, the way Park had looked at me. I thought of my family, safe and whole. Like they said, a storm, bad luck. The lie tasted bitter, but I swallowed it down. Life slowly returned to normal, or what passed for normal now. I went back to work at the engineering firm. I played with my daughters, helped with homework, fixed things around the house. But sleep eluded me. When I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing blue eyes staring back at me, heard the screams of the crew as the Washington broke apart. 6 weeks after my return, I found a package on our front porch when I got home from work. No postmark, no return address, just my name printed in block letters. I brought it inside and opened it when Jenna was busy helping the girls with dinner. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a new species of deep-sea squid discovered by marine biologists. The photograph showed something that looked nothing like what we'd encountered, a small, pale creature with normal proportions. The article made no mention of military involvement or lost vessels. Beneath the clipping lay a handwritten note on plain white paper. The mission never happened. Forget everything, or your family will pay the price. It was signed simply with the letter A. I stared at the note, my hands shaking. The handwriting looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. I folded the note and clipping, tucking them into my pocket as Jenna called me to dinner. That night, I sat at the table with my family, watching them laugh and talk, completely unaware of the threat hanging over us. I thought about Martinez's words in the raft, similar objects detected worldwide. I thought about the creature's intelligent eyes, the way it had examined the ship before destroying it. I thought about the note in my pocket and wondered who A was and how far they would go to keep the truth buried. I recognized the handwriting right away. The slanted, precise letters matched the original mission orders I'd received before boarding the Washington. My fingers trembled slightly as I held the paper over the metal trash can in my backyard. The evening air felt cool against my face, a stark contrast to the heat building in my chest. I'd waited until Jenna took the kids to her mother's house for dinner. This wasn't something they needed to see. The crumpled newspaper clipping about the newly discovered species of squid lay beside the threatening note, both mocking me with their existence. For your family's safety, forget what you saw. A. The match flared to life between my fingers. I touched it to the corner of the note, watching as the flame caught and spread across the paper. The edges curled and blackened, words disappearing into ash. I dropped it into the can as it burned, then added the newspaper clipping. The fire consumed both items, leaving nothing but gray flakes that crumbled when the breeze hit them. I stirred the ashes with a stick, making sure nothing readable remained. The smell of burning paper lingered in the air as I scattered the ashes and rinsed the can with the garden hose. No evidence left, just like they wanted. In the weeks that followed, I never mentioned the USS Washington to Jenna. Not a word about the mission, the creature, or what happened to the crew. She asked about the bruises when I first came home, about why I seemed so quiet. I told her the cover story, a training accident on an oil rig, nothing serious. The lie tasted bitter, but I swallowed it down for her sake, for our children's sake. At night, though, sleep came hard. When it finally did arrive, I heard it again, that low, rhythmic humming that had filled the hydrophones as the Nereid approached the sphere. The sound followed me through my dreams, vibrating in my bones until I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. Jenna would stir beside me, her hand finding mine in the darkness. "Bad dream?" she'd ask, voice thick with sleep. "Yeah," I'd answer, "just work stuff." I'd lie awake after that, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many other subjects lurked in the ocean depths, how many other spheres waited to be discovered, how many other crews had encountered them and never returned to tell the tale. Those eyes haunted me most of all, massive and blue, filled with an intelligence that shouldn't exist in a creature from the deep. They had looked at us, at me, with recognition, with purpose. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them staring back at me through the murky water, but I endured. For Jenna, for our kids, for the promise of normalcy that seemed more precious now than ever before. 2 months after my return, I started researching. Not from home, I wasn't that careless. I drove to the public library 3 towns over, where nobody knew me. I used their computers, always clearing the browser history, always using private browsing. Sometimes I'd visit internet cafes or university libraries, never establishing a pattern. I searched for ocean anomalies, unexplained maritime incidents, anything that might connect to what I'd seen. The results came in scattered fragments. A fishing vessel that disappeared off the coast of Chile despite clear weather and an experienced crew. Strange sonar readings reported by a research team near the Mariana Trench. Scientific expeditions that suddenly changed course without explanation, their findings classified or simply never published. None of the reports mentioned spheres or creatures with blue eyes. But reading between the lines, I found enough to know I wasn't alone in what I'd witnessed. Others had seen something too. Others had been silenced. After each research session, I'd compile my findings in a document on a flash drive I purchased with cash. I encrypted the file with a password only I knew, a combination of numbers and letters meaningful to me, but impossible to guess. The document grew longer with each session, containing everything I could remember about the Washington, the sphere, the creature, the way its skin had rippled with patterns of light, the intelligence in its gaze, the devastating power of its tentacles as they tore through metal and glass like paper. When I finished writing for the day, I'd return home and bury the flash drive in a waterproof container in our garden, beneath the rose bush Jenna had planted when we first bought the house. If anything happened to me, if A decided I knew too much despite my silence, the truth would survive. Someone might find it someday. Someone might connect the dots. Spring turned to summer, and Jenna suggested a beach trip. "The kids need some sun," she said. "And you need to relax. You've been so tense lately." I couldn't tell her why the idea filled me with dread. Couldn't explain why I flinched at the thought of looking out at those rolling waves, knowing what might lurk beneath them. But I agreed because saying no would raise questions I couldn't answer. We went on a Saturday. The beach was crowded with families, the air filled with laughter and the smell of sunscreen. The children ran toward the water, squealing with delight. Jenna spread out our blanket and smiled up at me, patting the space beside her. I sat down, my eyes fixed on the horizon where blue sky met blue water. The ocean stretched endlessly before us, beautiful and terrifying in its vastness. Somewhere out there, the Washington lay in pieces on the ocean floor. Somewhere out there, the creature moved through the darkness, perhaps watching, perhaps waiting. My son called to me from the shallows, waving excitedly. "Dad, come see the shells I found." I forced a smile and stood up. "Coming, buddy." I walked toward him, each step heavy with the weight of my secret. The water lapped at my ankles, cool and innocent, but I couldn't help scanning the deeper water, searching for any sign of disturbance, any hint of those glowing blue eyes rising from the depths. The knowledge sat like a stone in my chest, that the world beneath the waves held terrors beyond imagination, and I alone carried the burden of that truth. For now, I would carry this terrible secret alone. I would watch the ocean with newfound fear whenever we visited the beach. I would listen for that humming in my dreams. And I would hope that whatever agency had sent me that warning had truly contained the threat, or at least that it would remain in the depths where humanity rarely ventured. But I knew better. The ocean covers 70% of our planet, and we've explored less than 5% of it. There's plenty of room down there for monsters, and now I know they're watching us,